a lot of the information that I am going to present today to all of you is courtesy, a lot of the links I have, and courtesy also an amazing number of people, publishing colleagues and professionals, across the board, but a lot of senior management, and this includes the top level executives who have been extremely generous about giving me time and having constructive conversations so that we can then try and figure out, you know, a kind of a picture for you and present a picture which at least today I can say is representative of what we are going through. The reason why I am saying that we today and is because, like publishing everywhere, India too is going through interesting times. It's going through very interesting times. We have a lot of you know, we've got the print and the digital combination. We've got the different languages. We've got a lot of other things, and you will see how as the presentation proceeds, this is going to come. So, without too much ado, let me just take you to the next slide. So, to briefly give you, since we are looking at doing a bird's eye view, and we are doing a snapshot, I just wanted to put in a background that there's certain things that you should remember about India, that it is actually many markets in one. It's not it is definitely not homogeneous, and the homogeneity could be defined due to language, but here we have multiple languages, we have different cultural characteristics, etc. It is, after all, a subcontinent, so you can imagine the vastness. The other thing is that most Indians are bilingual, minimum bilingual. Beyond that, they can know 3, 4, 5 languages, and it is pretty common. But English is fast becoming the lingua franca. It is a language of social mobility, and something which I have not added here, a few people are also learning French. You know, so it's not, I mean, you do come across people who understand French, but it is not a big community. Also, because we're talking about publishing books, we also refer to it as a cultural repository. India is multicultural, enormously so. So we have English language, of course, which is thriving, and then we also have regional language publishing, which is thriving. So these are things which are important to remember as a background. To briefly mention stuff which everyone actually knows is that we are a 1 billion plus population. Most 2/3 of our population is in the cities. It's actually migrated to the cities. But interestingly enough, a huge proportion of this population, or the under 24, at the moment is 500 million, but it is growing rapidly. It's growing rapidly, and as this point says, it's 60% of the population, which is there between the 18 to 30 age group. And by 2020, it's presumed that the average age of Indians will be 27. So you can just imagine that in terms of publishing, in terms of a reading population, in terms of from any aspect that you enter, academics or work-related, self-help books, whatever, this is a huge population and a big target audience. Again, interestingly, even though we have these vast numbers in terms of population, and we also have talked about the tremendous growth, India's market share in global export of printed and published products is only 6.46%. But everyone is, a lot of the industry experts to whom I spoke to, or in the professionals I spoke to, said that they are very positive prospects. We are exporting, we are importing, etc. And surprisingly enough, our per capita consumption in India, this is a very recent statistic I picked up at a conference last week, is only 80 rupees per book. And we can always discuss this later, how this has come about. Earlier when I mentioned that there were data collection agencies, we didn't have too many, but Nielsen did enter India. Nielsen, which is everyone knows about, entered India in October 2011, and since then have begun tracking book sales in India. Again, we'll discuss the methodologies later if anyone's interested. Again, a few more broad-ranging statistics which will help publishers. Literacy rate today is 74% as opposed to 30%. Mobile telephone density is huge. It's 76% and still growing. I mean, everyone knows this. It's one of the world's largest internet user base, and this is because it's also supported by the government, and internet penetration is happening even in rural areas, etc., with dedicated lines. Okay. Again, I'm going to say this now, and I'm probably going to be repeating this often through these 2 hours, is that it is extremely difficult, despite all our best efforts, to put a correct value, if we can say that, to the Indian book market. And here, when I say Indian book market, this includes publishing being done domestically to also what is being imported, etc., etc. It is extremely difficult. Having said that, it is presumed to be about 2.53 billion Canadian dollars. Of this, trade books account for 30% of output by value. And this is of no surprise to at least publishers in India that education dominates the market share. And it is huge. It is huge. Again, we will touch upon education books, etc., a little later, but only briefly, because it is very difficult actually to club everything together. Each one has its very distinct characteristics. Since this is of interest here, English language publishing, you can see, is about 2/3. But that is only, again, because one is able to measure that to a certain extent. It is not always possible. It is not always possible to measure what's happening in the regional language publishing. And by measuring, I mean in various ways. Is it by a book depository system or how? We just do not have those facilities, although we do have a government policy making it mandatory, but it's not necessarily adhered to. Again, just to repeat myself, publishing over here in this webinar is going to be inclusive of books and journals. We are not really differentiating between everything, and this is inclusive of all the major categories we need to address: trade, children's, YA, education, etc. Etc. is just some minor categories we may come across. It also will be covering print, digital publishing, and publishing outsourcing, which is a big and growing industry. And of course, a little bit of the print industry, the actual printing industry. Even though it's very difficult to get figures, one of the things which everyone is clear about and is in agreement with is that we are the 6th largest book producing country in the world, and we are the 3rd largest consumer of English language books after USA and UK. And this is set to grow. it's growing and it is set to grow. Again, I would say that, yeah, we have 16,000 publishing houses, but I mean, we have, for this, I've been able to dig out a whole range of data and statistics. So 16,000 would be just a ballpark figure. It could be much, much more than that. Again, to clarify, the publishing ecosystem, as I would like to term it, includes multinationals, many of which have branches in Canada as well as in India. A lot of independent publishers, which is thriving and something which Canadian publishing industry would be familiar with. I mean, a phenomenal amount of regional language publishing houses, and they are very well known in their own languages. And then we also have a lot of government-sponsored publishers. These are predominantly educational, like NCERT and SCERT, which are the National Council for Education, Research and Training, and that's a state council, SCERT, state council. And they are responsible for creating textbooks for the school systems, making them available at an affordable price and distributing them across the country. And the figures in this are huge. Again, I don't have immediately the figures, but let's put it like this, that people, there are entire ancillary industries which can thrive on just catering to the NCERT and SCERT mandates. We have, now again, I wanted to focus a bit on some of the similarities between the Canadian industry, territories and territory and the Indian territory. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but in India we have something called what is the mixed economy system, where it sort of was instituted upon independence, but it is a combination of the coexistence of the government policies and a lot of private initiatives. Having said that, there are a range of government policies which I think would be important to list here as being relevant to the publishing industry, because they are going to, at some stage or the other, inform and have an impact on the publishing ecosystem. So some of the things which we have had for some time is like the Right to Education Act and all of that, and this policy which I mentioned. Every book published is supposed to be submitted to the government, but it is not necessarily always done. So we have no taxes on books, on the final product of the books. We in fact have something called the Special Indian Book Prize, and it is, a lot of the publishing colleagues I spoke to said it's about 30% lower than international editions. Recently, the government has introduced something called the National Readership Policy, where they are going to actively promote reading, and they're going to get into libraries, they're going to set up agencies all over the country, but clarity is required. We also have a copyright policy which is in there since independence, but was recently amended again in May with some interesting changes to it, but not any which have a really significant impact on publishing. It was mostly for the music industry, but having said that, there was a certain clause or two which have been sent up for review, and if that comes into effect, then it will have an impact on publishing. We also have a couple of agencies or institutions set up by the government, working closely with the government, responsible for publishing. One of these is the National Book Trust. It was set up in the 1950s. It's a trust, and it is a mandate, works directly under the government, and is responsible for a whole host of activities, most notably being the World Book Fair, which till this year was a biannual affair, but from next year it's going to become an annual affair. And it started in 1970, and it is initially it was just a book fair, and people used to just go there to buy books or whatever. But recently, I would say over the past decade or so, 8 years, there has been a certain transformation which has taken place in that it's becoming more and more a place where a lot of networking, rights, trade is happening, and it's even got a rights table, and it's got seminars happening on the sideline, very much in step with the Frankfurt Book Fair kind of flavors. Then we have a new organization which has just been set up called the Indian Literature Abroad, it's actually a project which has been initiated by the government to support and facilitate translation and promotion of literary heritage and contemporary literature from the Indian languages into foreign languages. So it's asking for translations, etc., and it's quite an interesting thing, but yet to take off. So these are some of the policies which I think are important to know about or to be aware about. Then in this ecosystem, it's in the last 2 years, 2010 and 2011, we've actually had two readership surveys. One by a magazine, by a daily, and one organized by the National Book Trust, or NBT as we love to call it, in collaboration with an economic agency, the NCAER, again governmental. Some of the interesting statistics. A lot of this will be available on the net, but and it's rather sort of detailed. But some of the things which are worth mentioning are that the literate youth in 2009 was estimated to be about 27% of the total population, or 73% of the total youth population, and it's sort of more in the rural area, surprisingly, and that the population of literate youth is the growth rate is higher than that of the overall population growth. The other thing which I would like to mention over here is that these statistics are wonderful and they're really good, and we do have a potential market, we do have a growing market. But what is very interesting, and it is a recent transformation, is that there is actually a growth in reading patterns. And till a few years ago, reading for pleasure or reading for leisure was not necessarily heard of. It was not very common, and it was not necessarily encouraged, because everyone was told, you have to study for your exams, you have to clear your school exams, you have to clear your college exams, don't waste your time, don't get distracted. Also, in terms of disposable incomes, etc., it was not always easy to afford reading material, to afford books for pleasure. But a lot of things are changing now. A lot of things are changing, and it's happening. We'll come to it later, but it's happening due to a lot of reasons. And as a result, reading is growing. Reading is growing, and it's growing. I'll mention briefly. It's growing because of the kind of online presence, the kind of the internet penetration, the kind of information exchange which is taking place, the kind of direct marketing by certain publishers in schools, etc. All of this is informing the publishing ecosystem and creating and nurturing a potential market for books, potential market for readers. Having said that, Hindi continues to be the principal medium of instruction. Even though English is the lingua franca, a lot of people are comfortable reading and communicating in the language, in them, what we call the mother tongue, what we love to call the mother tongue. This was, I thought, interesting. In this one of the surveys, it came out that there has been a perceptible growth in the youth reading for pleasure, and of course, women continue to increase, are more than the men. Schools are important for readership development, as I mentioned. Direct marketing, the syllabi are now being made in such a way that they insist that the children read rather than just read books for exams. And all of this is fostering and nurturing the growth. Okay, all that is like literally part of the background. In terms of growth rates, as I mentioned earlier, India is a market which is many markets in one, many markets. But as publishers, we all know, we need to know what is happening in digital, we need to know what's happening in print. And interestingly enough, in India, both are growing. Both are growing. We also classify our towns and cities according to the the population. And what has been seen in the last 3 to 4 years, I won't even say 5, but 3 to 4 years certainly, there has been a tremendous growth in class 1, 2, and 3 towns. These are towns with a population of 50,000 and above, or 100,000 and 1 million and above. And I mean, even now, many of these towns do not have a bookshop in them, do not have a physical brick and mortar bookshop. But reading is growing and print is growing. When I was speaking to some industry colleagues, they were saying one of the interesting patterns which is emerging is that the print runs are dwindling in metros, but picking up tremendously in towns and villages. Again, education these may be driven by education, but as we are discovering, if you start looking at the sales and statistics closely, it's even trade books which are increasing. Book hunger, an appetite for books, and something which I've been mapping and noticing for a while and is being corroborated now by a lot of other discussions, is that there is a great deal of inverted snobbery, if you can call it, about what book have you read, how fast have you read, and it's fascinating watching this transformation come in. It's really fascinating. And for me, as a publishing professional, when there's a lack of statistics, this kind of these kind of anecdotes add up to the bigger picture and should be taken note of. Again, to just give you an indication or it's the size of the publishing market in India, the publishing world, our domestic book printing is estimated to be 1.26 billion Canadian dollars. And this is according to a survey by PIRA International UK. By 2016, it's predicted to reach 1.81 billion, but who knows, it may increase faster than that. And yet, India's share is only 0.5% in the global book print industry, which is astounding. So maybe we don't know the reason, maybe the consumption is happening here or whatever. We have these special economic zones, I don't think I described them earlier, which the government has created. There are different pockets around the country, and they have facilities which offer you to print, etc., and make it easy to facilitate, overseas orders and export, import, etc. This is a figure that Nicholas and I have been discussing for some time. The only agency or the document where we've been able to get some kind of information on the imports and exports is the UN Comtrade website. And last relevant data was from 2010, where it's estimated that our imports in the publishing are 545 million US dollars and 217 million US dollars. But I think you cannot assume that all of this is books. It could be anything. It could be loose sheets, it could be folders, leaflets, magazines, etc. There are many, many gradations, and one really needs to pore over those Excel sheets to figure out what is the actual value. And maybe this doesn't include a lot of the rights deals which happen. You know, those are probably not included in this. Again, this is something which can only be validated when you talk to your colleagues. But having said that, never forget that this is a potential market. It is. And you can gauge it by the fact that the Indian middle class is growing by 40 million individuals every year. That's a lot of people. India exports to more than 150 countries, and this is again courtesy a government agency which is monitors exports. Some of our export markets and etc. mentioned here. The Canadian thing, our relationship with Canada is surprisingly we've only imported 256,000 worth of books, and this is US dollars, which is, as you can figure out, is a small portion. It's got the potential there. So that is for the Canada. One of the things which I'm just mentioning briefly, and I will not really go into great detail, is about publishing outsourcing services that India is known for. I think it's number one, and followed by the Philippines, and it is a huge industry. It's really big. I mean, you can just gauge if the global one is 1.5 billion US dollars, in India it's 1.2 billion dollars, and it's growing, and it offers all kinds of services that you can think of, right from copy editing to book packaging to printing to anything remotely connected with publishing, and you name it and it's there. I've seen some of the agencies are, in fact, a lot of these agencies, they are willing to do stuff for books, to journals, for anything. And they have a large number of clients from overseas, particularly from the USA and UK. I've listed some of the publishing houses working with these outsourcers. And we don't know as yet, but it is estimated, it's an emerging trend, is that digital publishing and e-publishing is another big area worth tapping into. Again, it merits some, like a report of its own. Education. Since this is only a bird's eye view, I'm only going to give a very brief snapshot of education, which is that we do have all the major publishers here. I've listed some. What I've listed here is a mixed bag of Indian publishers and some well-known ones, like we have OBS's and Orient Black Swan, OUP, Pearson, Macmillan, Wiley. They're all here. Producing books as textbooks, organizing book exhibitions and fairs. I mean, it's so big that if you are a publisher immersed in trade, it's not necessary that you will know your counterparts in education. It's so big. There are no direct government policies for this particular segment, but some of the education publishers I was speaking to, they were pegging the growth at 25% per annum, which is I mean, even I kept asking them to clarify, and they said this is what they're thinking. That's the rate of growth. Something which is, a trend which has been noticed abroad is that tablets and e-platforms are having an impact. But in India, because of the kind of range of schools and the range of purchasing power that we have, tablets will have an impact, but not a significant one in the immediate future. And I will explain this later, because we have like, I don't know how many, 92, 93 at the last count, kind of variety of tablets available in this ecosystem. So it's very difficult to measure the impact. But another emerging trend is of offering smart classes and customized content, for which now there is a crying need to create more and more content and make it available in real time and make it relevant, not just available, but relevant to the consumer. Some of the other interesting things of the government initiatives, I've popped the slide in here so that it sort of becomes clearer now. The government has made a commitment of setting aside, and there is, we have things like, now we have an education cess which we have to give. I think it's 2% or something on all our services, and the government through taxation is mopping up a kitty and setting aside for education, etc. Setting aside for printing books, making it available, etc. We do have the other thing where the government is helping is by encouraging digital consumption, particularly in the universities, and where they encourage, where they help and they subsidize institutions in buying journals and e-books. Again, publishing colleagues told me that this market is expected to grow almost three times in the next 10 years. But those are predictions being made today. We don't know. Maybe next year things may change and we may have a far more rapid growth. We don't know. The things are the system is changing so rapidly. It's very interesting to watch. But these are very valid predictions, because these are being made by informed colleagues, and who've been immersed in this for a long time. Again, private education market is supposed to grow. Indian education market is still using a lot of books, etc. Okay, this is something which I think is an interesting segment in publishing. Not necessarily because I have a soft corner for it, but it is certainly a segment that cannot be ignored. In 2010, I was told by a leading importer and distributor of books that the sales of children's books in India is about $90 million and it is growing. And again, the rate of growth, let's say conservative and reserved one, is about 25% or more, but it is growing. I was talking to some bookstore owners, children's bookstore owners. We actually have those in India. A few, but we still have them, and they continue to survive against all odds. They say that the ratio of Indian versus foreign authors on their bookshelves is 40:60, which is a very interesting mix. And we have children's bookstores coming up across the city. Again, the National Book Trust, which I mentioned earlier, NBT, is and has been for years, ever since it was set up, was one of the leading children's books publishers, and even today it continues to produce books at an affordable price. And the other interesting point about them is the moment they get a manuscript, they automatically translate it into all the 14, 15 languages that they're supposed to translate into and make it available simultaneously. There are some private publishers doing it, but here this is a government initiative, so they do it regularly. I mean, no questions asked. It's all manuscripts. The some of the other interesting factors which have come in recent years, which is nurturing this growth, is that we actually have children-focused book fairs and festivals, and this is increasing. There's a, by increasing I mean there is a demand, and these they're branching out, and there are more and more coming up. Bookaroo is one of the most well-known ones, and happens in November. I think it's the third weekend of November every year. It's worth attending. It's really worth attending. Um, we also have things like the direct marketing of books by scholastics, by some of these bookstores. And I attended a book this thing fair about 10 days ago, and it was interesting to watch the children, all ages, were buying a pile of books, and they were not buying it because of peer pressure. They were buying it because they were interested. They were interested, and they just kept coming back for more and more and more. Then we also have programs like Paro Anand's Literature in Action, which is she's one of our very, very well known authors, and she has this program where she uses literature to communicate and to create situations in classrooms which may lead to cathartic moments, but they're very interesting, and she has engaged in a lot of projects. A leading book chain like Crosswords has a children's event every Sunday afternoon in all their stores. I think they have 80, 90 stores around the country and growing. We have clubs like the India Habitat Center in Delhi, which has a book club for children, which meets every second Saturday. We have book weeks in schools. Entire book weeks. We have book clubs that circulate newsletters. And we have a lot of children's publishers coming up, this year alone, we've got these two new ones, Red Turtle and Duckbill. So it just shows that there is a growing demand which is coming up. We also have, it's only recently that the Crossword Book Awards and Sahitya Academy recognized this and gave it and have a distinct category. For now, everything is clubbed under one, but maybe time will tell, things will change. This is also an area where in digital publishing, a lot more apps are being produced. Yesterday, for instance, I had a new publisher on the blog, Mango Reads, and they are very, very new. They came up, I think, end of last year, but already this year, they have won the Young Creative Entrepreneurs Award instituted by the British Council. They are solely into digital publishing with for children's books, and all across the board. It's not just domestic, but in overseas as well. The other interesting fact is, and this is something which hasn't really changed over the years. Though we have a growing reading population and trends are there, the positive indicators are there, surprisingly, we tend to lose as in quotes, lose a lot of readers once they come into the 14 plus age group, about 14 plus to 18 plus. And that is when the pressure of school exams increases. But then they re-emerge. During college days and university. Another crying need in India is for picture and board books, but there are hardly any publishers. And this can be gauged by the success of, say, an imprint like Walker Books. Walker Books is known for having published Julia Donaldson's Gruffalo. When the sales person responsible for introducing it into India brought it in about 10 years ago, nobody had heard of Gruffalo. Nobody had heard of Walker Books. And today it's a phenomenon, and the Walker Books exist everywhere, and their picture books are prominent, etc. So in that sense, silences due to a sheer lack of information or knowledge or know-how about thing can easily be transformed with good strategic planning, and that is a case study unto itself. How this has happened. One of the ways we do have. We do have some picture books being produced. We do have all of them, but not in the way that publishers abroad would be familiar with. We have like Pratham, Eklavya, Tulika, Katha. They're all doing fabulous picture books, but not and CBT, the Children's Book Trust, etc., but not in those big volumes and that kind of style. Another very, very interesting trend which is coming up is there's this trust called Pratham, which publishes in 15, 20 languages. It's amazing how many languages they produce in, and they cater mostly to the underprivileged. And and that's across the board in cities as well as in the rural areas. They did an experiment of creating what are called story cards, which are five story cards, like on an A4 sheet or maybe less, in packets of 5, sold for something like 20 rupees, and which is nothing. It's less than 50 US cents, nothing, but it's a lot of money for a lot of children over here. So, and they have managed to create these distribution networks which go across the country, and they are easily available at your local grocers, etc., and they're doing phenomenally well. And all these publishers told me that for them what was most important was the value of content. It was really, really important for them. And the other thing is that the bookstore owners told me that they said that they find hand selling is extremely crucial, because even though we have readers, we don't necessarily have that knowledge transference from generation to generation. There's a wide variety available. It could be wider, but for now it's wide. So they're always looking for people to help them along. We do have libraries. We do have a National Library Commission, which was announced earlier this year. In fact, 2012 is the centenary of the library movement. I sort of merged it in with the children's thing, because libraries are school libraries are very important for children. We don't have too many public libraries. They exist, but they're not in very good condition. Again, coming back to NBT, it does have mobile library vans, and the staff over there have some truly fascinating tales to tell. How even now in 2012, children are dying to read, and they don't necessarily cannot afford the books, but they're willing to do things. NBT has it and has been doing it as part of their mandate for years. Now slowly some other entrepreneurs are doing it. Interestingly, though they may be not a decline, but fewer brick and mortar kind of libraries, we have a lot of online libraries coming up. And we also have niche libraries emerging, which is very interesting. And this is all a very recent phenomenon. It's happening in the last 2-3 years. So that's something which is worth mapping, and I'm sure it's going to create some kind of a change. The other thing which I think adds up to a potential market and is worth exploring are the growing number of book clubs. One of the largest in India, if you please, is at SAP Labs. It's an IT firm, but the person who runs a book club was telling me, he says they have over 1,000+ members, and it's very interesting how they conduct it. Bookstores. Again, this is a ballpark figure, 5,000 stores. This depends on how you define a store. Is it exclusive bookstore, or is it something with a mixed use or whatever? But apparently there are 5,000 brick and mortar stores selling books. We have a growing number of book launches, and the season has just begun here in India. It's sort of September to April. And when that happens, it's not surprising to have 2, 3, 5 book launches on a day. We do have literary agents, few, but they're there. We have magazines and papers offering review spaces, offering feature articles, author interviews. Small space, but it is there. It's definitely there. We have writing workshops happening, online and offline. And I mean, if anything is to go by like this, today alone, I've got 2 queries asking about workshops happening. We have what I would like to call literary tastemakers. Certain reviewers, certain critics are looked up to for reviewing books, and they help filter, and they're fairly influential. We have a growing number of literary festivals. Of course, the Jaipur Literary Festival everyone knows about. It's a 4 or 5 day affair in January, etc. But we've had literary festivals for a long time, and the National Book Trust has done many in the past, continues to do. We have a lot of private initiatives now. We have the Hay, which does a festival here in India, in Trivandrum. So we have a huge number, and it's amazing. It's absolutely astounding how packed these festivals are. I mean, it's over and over again. I have authors telling me, it's incredible. The room was overflowing, and people actually have read us. So I think all of this adds up. Also, the new phenomenon which has come up in the last 2 years to 3 years is significant publishing conferences through the year. We have Jumpstart, which focuses exclusively on children's literature. We have FICCI, which is the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce of India, a semi-governmental body which has started a publishing cell, and Publishing Next, which holds a conference every year in Goa, all with very distinct identities. And I mean, I've been attending them, and every year I see how the audience is growing. It's growing, and these, mind you, none of these are open occasions. All of them are by you have to buy this thing. Since we are talking about publishing, it's a good time here to mention distribution, sales, bookstores, etc. As I mentioned, bookstores exist, but some are closing down, not necessarily due to the factors which are familiar in other nations, but primarily due to high rental costs, or as some of the legendary bookstores are closed because the heirs don't want to carry on the business. Having said that, I was told that this is estimated to have a 15% growth rate, which is still great. Because when you hear of some closing, at the same time you hear of 2 or 3 others opening. So something is happening. There will be a correction which will happen. Online retail. Now this was interesting, which is something which I discovered while doing this research, has a growth rate of 200 to 300%. Which is phenomenal, and this is being driven by, if you recall, that book hunger which exists in all the other towns, and they did not have a bookstore. So now you can order online, and it may be easy as it looks, but over here in India there are other peculiarities. There is a growing comfort level with the plastic money. Indians by nature distrust credit cards and credit card economy. So a lot of, if not all, online retail providers, service providers, actually offer cash facilities or check facilities. Not necessarily. I mean, it has its own pros and cons, but it actually entices the customer. We have 3 big distributors in India, and of course we have a whole lot of others. IBD, Prakash Books, and Rupa. And we have specific distributors catering just to railway stations. And when you know the kind of figures we deal with railway stations, it's huge. We have that in one of the largest railway systems in the world. Interestingly, even though some of the brick and mortar stores are growing, footfalls in bookstores are declining. Or as bookstore owners were telling me, people come in to browse. They do that kind of browsing and discovery and all, and then they scuttle away to buy online, because online they're getting the discounts. And this is in a market where, as it is, books are being priced carefully, because price points are very important over here. If if you get it wrong, you don't sell. Digital. As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of platforms available. We have the government relaunching the Akash tablet, but the Kindle arrived. Some say subsidized rates, but if you actually check, it's not really a subsidized rate. It's actually being offered at the same rate as it is available elsewhere in the world. It's just that it is now easily available in India. You know, earlier on, if anyone wanted a Kindle, they had to ask for it from abroad. So I've put in subsidized rates, but I would be careful about saying that. E-books. I mean, Amazon, I think when they, as you know, they have opened shop in India. Last week they circulated a newsletter saying that now they're going to be offering that same model for their authors as they do in the rest of the world, 70% royalties, etc. Flipkart, which is one of the biggest vendors, online vendors in India, has, and it's only local, it doesn't process international orders, has signed contracts with many, many publishers to launch ebooks. And I heard through the industry grapevine that a soft launch happened on the 15th of September. They're planning to go live soon, just as Amazon will go live, I think, in November or some such thing. This, again, some of the statistics reeled out at the FICCI conference held in early September was that the ebook market share in India was 7%. And already, within the space of a year, it's grown to 20% in 2011. So something is happening somewhere. We may not necessarily have all the statistics, but something is happening somewhere. Just to repeat, we do have a mixed environment with platforms, but everyone is saying that it's probably the smartphones which are going to lead the race, not necessarily a Kindle, etc. Because we have to always balance it with the purchasing power of the individual, the budgeted households, and all that. Okay. If you remember when we talked about the background, I said we have many markets. We also have a thriving regional language publishing system. The next few slides, I'm not going to read them out, but you will see the size of each market, and these are just estimates which I got through some colleagues. Hindi, for instance, Hindi language has 422 million. Telugu. These are the kind of numbers of readers in each language. We have publishing houses catering to exclusively for these languages, and they cater not just locally, but one of the things to remember is they cater to a diaspora. If every 1 in 6 person on the planet is an Indian, you can just imagine how big the diaspora community is, and an important community to tap into, and for whom making literature available is important. Each region language publishing space is very distinct with its own cultural identity. They have book fairs, state libraries, mobile libraries. They have a whole lot of things happening. And they offer, I think even in some states, they even network with publishers and offer book packages for book deals for school libraries, etc. In the past, I know that has been happening. There are digital initiatives, like I heard in Tamil Nadu last year, of offering a massive number of books on a data card, which can be read on a mobile. So, but always remember, it's the affordability of these facilities which is the key. Some interesting trends. Again, these are just, I mean, I'm not sure how to say whether these are trends, but these are certainly things which are apparent now. In English language market, we have the coexistence of literary fiction, self-help books, mind, body, spirit, mass market. Trade fiction, trade definitely rules the roost, definitely. And in that, it is mass market fiction which is currently just outstripping everyone else in sales. It's just phenomenal what's happening over here. The kind of units being sold is like 100,000, 200,000. These are figures unheard of. Even 4 years ago, 5 years ago, these were unheard of. But now that's happening. And having said that, general and literary fiction continues to outsell everything. According to Nielsen's, and I got this is like fresh data I got from them about 10 days ago. They said, I mean, of course, their community is still small but growing. The community from which they get this information. Fiction is growing by 50% in volume and 32% in value. Non-fiction has grown only by 29% in value and 24% in value. Children's and YA, they corroborated, continues to grow rapidly. And this is a data of predominantly English language, not necessarily regional language as yet. The other thing which I've already said, children's literature is growing phenomenally well. But even though trade may be selling 30% or more by value, by volume, it's the mind, body, spirit lists which are outstripping everything else. But then by volume, their price points are very low. They're like 50 rupees, 60 rupees the book, but they're selling. I think The Secret and all sold, when they sold, the initial print runs of 50, 60,000, and they're just selling. Now, surprisingly, a lot of domestic authors are selling more than the others. There's this interesting trend which has come about recently. And there is a need for translations and cross-pollination of cultures and literature, but it's not happening as vibrantly as it should, but it will happen. It's not happening as vibrantly in English language, but it is definitely happening in the regional languages. And of course, the steady sellers are the dictionaries, etc. So that is a very interesting trend. Something which is a common point with publishing globally, storytellers and content is becoming more and more important, and this is where a lot of stress has to be put in. Translations are a very expensive proposition, but a growing business. Infrastructure is also growing, so one day there has to be a match, and they will all add up to the market potential. The other thing is collaborations between publishers. This is something which started with Zuban collaborating with Penguin and doing a co-pub list, and subsequently many others have done it. And why not? It's literally a matching of strengths, and it's picking up. Existence of independent publishers. It is a thriving and a vibrant and an excellent community with its own kind of distribution patterns, marketing systems, niche areas, followers. I mean, they have devout followers, but they are also being accessed by the general readers, etc. Another interesting thing, distributors are setting up publishing houses. All those people I mentioned earlier, Rupa, IBD, Prakash Books, they've all set up publishing houses. And regional language publishers are setting up English language publishing houses. And they are also looking for buying rights and all of that. I mentioned this earlier, diaspora is an important and growing reader base, so something which needs to be addressed and looked at. And of course, a change in trends, rising middle class with disposable income and an inclination to read for pleasure, buying tablets, etc., and thus increasing the reading habit, commuter patterns changing, so the reading habit coming in. A lot of this which is fairly evident abroad, but is now sort of coming into the country here. For instance, Delhi, which introduced its metro system, the metro trains only 3 years ago, now runs to full capacity, and you inevitably see people reading on their phones, reading on their tablets, reading paper books, which is something which they didn't earlier. Retail chains like Walmart, which exists in Punjab these days, a state up north, they are actually stocking books. Um, so that is what is happening. Hand selling is important. Direct, it's interesting how direct the links are being created between publisher and consumer through a variety of ways, particularly through social media management. Yes, all of this is adding up to a fragmentation of the read market, and and very difficult to assess reading sensibilities. But every aspect is important. And although these last four slides have talked about trends, it's not necessarily. I mean, it's early days still. We are going through interesting times, and we have to see what's growing. To repeat, the future is positive. Market is growing. Doing business, you have to be aware of the cultural peculiarities and characteristics, but embed yourself in. Don't think that it'll be possible to do a business in 2 years or 3 years. I mean, it will be possible, but always have your business plans sort of spread over 10 years. Because things are definitely going to grow here, and it's important. It's a culturally specific market, but except for a handful of Canadian authors, there's a deafening silence, and that is so evident from the $256,000 worth of Canadian literature imported. But having said that, niche ecosystems like graphic novelists do know about the Canadian publishing houses existing in that. So I think we should capitalize on such linkages. And of course, the diasporic community is a rich tapping zone. Last week, Shauna Singh Baldwin released her latest novel there at I think a local McNally's, and it's getting already good reviews, and it's being talked about in India, and it's being released by Simon & Schuster in India. And if to increase and foster B2Bs, it's important to have direct contact with publishers. Try and attend the World Book Fair. Talk to specialists who know and who can help you out with direct inquiries and getting the linkages, because that really they will know how to map. There are many publishing associations. None with more than 1,000 members. Definitely no apex body, but yes, some would be able to help you out. And as I said, FICCI also has one now. That's it. But if there's anything else you wish to ask, we've got another few minutes after this. So thank you very much.